October 1944. The war in the Pacific has reached its critical turning point. For 3 years, American forces had been clawing their way across thousands of miles of ocean, taking islands one by one in a bloody campaign that has cost tens of thousands of lives on both sides. Now, General Douglas MacArthur stands on the beach at Leyte Island in the Philippines, making good on the promise he made 2.5 years earlier when he fled the Japanese invasion. "I shall return." The Philippines. These islands are more than just territory. They are the lifeline of the Japanese Empire. To the south lie the oil fields of Borneo and the Dutch East Indies fields that provide 80% of Japan's oil. Every drop of fuel that keeps Japanese ships at sea, Japanese aircraft in the air, and Japanese tanks rolling comes through shipping lanes that pass through the Philippines. If Japan loses the Philippines, they lose access to that oil. Without oil, the Imperial Japanese Navy becomes nothing more than a collection of floating museums. The Army's tanks and trucks become immobile steel coffins. Japan's war machine grinds to a complete and final halt. Every Japanese admiral, every general, every member of the High Command understands this simple, terrifying reality, which is why, in the fall of 1944, Japan makes the decision to gamble everything on one massive, desperate operation. They call it Victory Operation. It will be the largest naval operation Japan has ever attempted, involving virtually every combat-worthy ship left in their navy. It will either save the empire or destroy what remains of their fleet. There will be no second chance. The Japanese plan, a masterpiece of DICIPTO and Admiral Soimo Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Japanese Combined Fleet, understands that Japan no longer has the strength to win a straightforward battle against the American Navy. The U.S. Pacific Fleet is massive dozens of carriers, battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. Japan's navy, ravaged by 3 years of war, cannot match it ship for ship. But Toyoda is gambling that cleverness can overcome raw power. His plan is elegant in its simplicity and brutal in its ruthlessness. It relies on deception, timing, and the willingness to sacrifice thousands of men as bait. The plan has 4 parts, 4 separate forces approaching from different directions, each with a specific role to play. Admiral Nishimura's southern force will approach through Surigao, straight from the south. His force consists of 2 battleships, the Yamashiro and the Fuso, both veterans of the attack on Pearl Harbor, 1 heavy cruiser, and 4 destroyers. Nishimura knows he's sailing into a trap. American battleships and cruisers guard Surigao Strait. He will almost certainly be destroyed. That's the point. He is the first bait, meant to draw American attention southward. Following behind Nishimura comes Admiral Shima's second striking force to heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser, and 7 destroyers. Shima's job is to support Nishimura if by some miracle he survives, or to retreat if the trap proves too deadly. Shima is expendable. The third force is commanded by Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, and his job is perhaps the most tragic of all. Ozawa commands the mobile force, built around 4 aircraft carriers, the Zuikaku, the Zuiho, the Kitos, and the Q. On paper, this is a formidable strike force. In reality, it's a hollow shell. Japan has no carrier pilots left. The training programs that produced the elite aviators who struck Pearl Harbor and rampaged across the Pacific in 1942 were destroyed. The few pilots Japan manages to train now receive perhaps 100 hours of flight time before being sent into combat. Compared to the 500 hours American pilots received, most of them die on their first mission. Ozawa's carriers are nearly empty. They carry perhaps 100 aircraft total, most of them obsolete models flown by inexperienced pilots. But Ozawa's carriers aren't meant to strike the Americans. They're meant to be seen, to be a target, to draw Admiral William Bullhalsey and the American fast carriers away from the Philippines. Ozawa is the ultimate bait. He knows it. His men know it. They are sailing north to die so that the 4th force can strike. And what a force it is! Admiral Kurita's center force, the most powerful fleet Japan will ever assemble, the heart of the Japanese plan. The killing blow that will win or lose everything belongs to Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita. His center force is the most powerful surface action group Japan has assembled since the Battle of Midway. It represents the absolute pinnacle of Japanese naval power. Every lesson learned, every technological advancement, every tactical innovation of 3 years of brutal warfare concentrated into one overwhelming hammer blow. Let me take you through what Kurita commanded, ship by ship, because you need to understand just how powerful this force was. First, the battleships. Kurita has 4, and 2 of them are legends. The Yamato and her sister ship Musashi are the largest battleships ever built by any nation. Each one displaces 72,800 tons. When fully loaded, that's heavier than any 2 American battleships combined. They are 863 feet long, longer than 3 football fields placed end to end. Their main battery consists of 9 18.1-inch guns, the largest naval rifles ever mounted on a warship. Each shell weighs 3,200 pounds more than a small car. When these guns fire, the concussion alone can kill a man standing too close. The flash can be seen from 30 miles away. The Yamato's armor is legendary. Her main belt is 16 inches of hardened steel, angled to deflect shells. Her deck armor is 9 inches thick. Her gun turrets have 25.6 inches of armor on their faces. American 16-inch shells, the heaviest the U.S. Navy has, would have difficulty penetrating this protection at any range. The Yamato was designed to fight multiple American battleships simultaneously and win. The Musashi is her identical twin, equally massive, equally deadly. Kurita's other 2 battleships are the Nagato and the Haru. While not as large as the super battleships, they are still formidable warships armed with 14-inch and 16-inch guns respectively. The Nagato, flying Admiral Yamamoto's flag at Pearl Harbor, carries the weight of history and the determination of revenge. Next, the heavy cruisers. Kurita commands 6 of them: the Otago, Maya, Tako, Chikai, Myoko, and Hag. Each one is a masterpiece of naval architecture, designed around the Japanese naval doctrine of overwhelming first strikes. They carry 10 8-inch guns, and critically the Type 9-3 Longlance torpedo. The Longlance is the finest torpedo in the world. It runs on pure oxygen, leaving no wake. It carries 1,080 pounds of high explosive, twice the warhead of American torpedoes. It has a range of 24 miles, at 48 knots. By comparison, American torpedoes in 1944 have a range of about 6 miles. The Longlance can kill a battleship with a single hit. Japanese heavy cruisers carry 16 of them. Rounding out the force are 2 light cruisers, the Nishiro and Yahagi, and 11 destroyers. Even these light ships are dangerous, each armed with torpedoes and guns. In total, Kurita's center force musters more firepower than most nations possessed in their entire navy. If you add up all the guns, all the torpedoes, all the armor, all the men, it represents decades of Japanese naval tradition, billions of yen in construction costs, and the lives of tens of thousands of sailors who spent years training to fight on these ships. This is the force that will punch through San Bernardino Strait and fall upon the American invasion fleet like the hammer of God. There's just one problem that the Americans don't know they're coming. The American forces, David, guarding the INVAC. The Japanese assemble their massive striking forces. The American fleet is divided into several groups, each with specific responsibilities. Admiral William Bull Halsey commands the 3rd Fleet, which includes the fast carriers Essex-class fleet carriers and their escorts. These are the elite strike forces of the U.S. Navy, capable of projecting air power hundreds of miles. Halsey also commands Task Force 34, a surface action group of 6 battleships and their escorts, specifically formed to deal with any Japanese surface threat. These ships are stationed off San Bernardino Strait, guarding the northern approach to Leyte Gulf. To the south, Admiral Thomas Kincaid commands the 7th Fleet, which includes the invasion transports and their escorts. Guarding the southern approach through Surigao Strait are 6 battleships: the Mississippi, Maryland, West Virginia, Tennessee, California, and Pennsylvania. 5 of these 6 were damaged or sunk at Pearl Harbor. They're older, slower than Halsey's battleships, but they're perfectly positioned to stop any force trying to come through Surigao Strait. And then there are the escort carriers. The 7th Fleet includes 3 groups of escort carriers, designated Task Unit 77.4, 177.4.2, and 77.4.3. The Navy calls them Taffy 1, Taffy 2, and Taffy 3. These aren't the fast fleet carriers that sail with Halsey. These are escort carriers, small, slow aircraft carriers built on merchant ship hulls using mass production techniques. They're designed to be cheap and quick to build. Their job is to provide air support for ground troops and to hunt submarines. They are not designed for surface combat. Each Taffy group consists of 6. escort carriers, and a screen of destroyers and destroyer escorts. They operate in a box formation, carriers in the center, screening ships on the perimeter, about 30 miles off the coast of Samar Island. Taffy 3, the northernmost group, is commanded by Rear Admiral Clifton Ziggy Sprague. At 48 years old, Sprague is a naval aviator with a reputation for competence and steady nerves. He's going to need both. His 6 escort carriers are the Fanshawe Bay, his flagship, St. Lo, White Plains, Callinan Bay, and Gambier Bay. Let me explain what an escort carrier actually is, because it's important to understand just how outmatched these ships will be. An escort carrier is about 500 feet long and displaces roughly 10,000 tons. Compare that to a fleet carrier like the Essex, which is 872 feet long and displaces 27,000 tons. An escort carrier has a top speed of about 17 knots, barely faster than a surfaced submarine. A Japanese battleship can make 27 knots. The escort carrier's flight deck is made of wood. Its hull has minimal armor, thin enough that a heavy cruiser shell would pass straight through without exploding. The sailors call them Kaiser coffins after Henry J. Kaiser, whose shipyards mass-produced them. Each escort carrier holds about 28 aircraft, a mix of FM-2 Wildcat fighters and TBM Avenger torpedo bombers. The Wildcats are obsolete, an older design kept in production for escort carriers, while the fleet carriers get the newer F-6F Hellcats. The Avengers are good planes, but they're loaded for ground support and submarine hunting, depth charges, and anti-personnel bombs, not the armor-piercing bombs needed to hurt a battleship. Screening these 6 carriers are 7 destroyers and destroyer escorts. This is where our story really begins. 3 of them are Fletcher-class destroyers, the USS Johnston, USS Hoel, and USS Hero. Fletcher-class destroyers are the workhorses of the U.S. Navy. They're 376 feet long, displace 2,100 tons, and carry 5 5-inch guns in single turrets. They also carry 10 21-inch torpedo tubes in 2 quintuple mounts, 5 tubes on each side. They have a top speed of 36 knots. They're designed to hunt submarines, escort convoys, and conduct anti-aircraft defense. They are not designed to fight battleships. The other 4 ships are John C. Butler class destroyer escorts, the USS Dennis, USS John C. Butler, USS Raymond, and USS Samuel B. Roberts. These ships are even smaller, 306 feet long, displacing just 1,400 tons. They carry only 2 5-inch guns and 3 torpedo tubes. Their top speed is 24 knots. They exist for one purpose: to protect convoys from submarines. That's it. They have less firepower than a single destroyer, and they're facing battleships with more armor than they have displacement. The sailors who serve on destroyers and destroyer escorts call their ships tin cans because the hulls are so thin. A heavy shell will often pass clean through both sides of the ship without exploding because there isn't enough resistance to trigger the fuse. This sounds like a good thing until you realize that the shell leaves 2 massive holes for water to pour through, and if the shell does explode inside the ship, the thin hull offers no protection whatsoever. These are the ships that will save the invasion fleet. These 7 tin cans against 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers. The mathematics of this fight are absurd. It's not a battle, it's an execution, except someone forgot to tell the American sailors that. October 2 for TH. The trap is Japanese plan begins to unfold on October 24, 1944. Admiral Kurita's center force is transiting the Palawan Passage west of the Philippines when 2 American submarines, the USS Data and USS Dace, are lying in wait at 0532 hours. The Data launches 6 torpedoes at Kurita's flagship, the heavy cruiser Atago. For torpedoes hit, the Atago explodes in a massive fireball and sinks in 18 minutes. Admiral Kurita is blown off the bridge into the water. He's rescued, but 360 men die with the Atago. Minutes later, the Data and Dace launch more torpedoes. The heavy cruiser Maya takes 4 hits and sinks in 4 minutes, taking 336 men with her. The heavy cruiser Takao is hit by 2 torpedoes and heavily damaged, forced to retreat to Brunei for repairs. Kurita has lost 3 heavy cruisers before he's even entered Philippine waters, but he presses on. He transfers his flag to the Yamato and continues east. Later that morning, American carrier aircraft from Halsey's Task Force 38 find Kurita's fleet in the Sibion Sea. For the next 6 hours, Wave after wave of American dive bombers and torpedo planes attack the Japanese ships. They concentrate their attacks on the largest target, the super battleship Musashi. The Musashi is hit again and again. 19 torpedoes slam into her hull. 17 bombs crash through her decks. By any rational measure, she should have sunk after the first 5 torpedo hits. But the Musashi is the most heavily armored ship ever built. She absorbs punishment that would have sunk 3 normal battleships. But even the Musashi has limits. By late afternoon, she is listing heavily, her speed reduced to barely 10 knots. At 19:35 hours, she capsizes and sinks, taking over 1,000 men with her. Admiral Kurita, watching the Musashi die, makes a decision. His fleet has been under continuous air attack for hours. He's lost one of his super battleships. His crews are exhausted. He orders his force to turn around, to head back west, away from the Philippines. American reconnaissance planes report this to Admiral Halsey. The report says that Kurita's force is in retreat. Halsey, reading this report, believes that the threat from Kurita's center force is over. The Japanese are running. This is exactly what the Japanese want him to think. While Kurita's apparent retreat is being reported, Admiral Ozawa's carrier force is finally spotted to the north. Ozawa has been trying to get noticed all day, sending out radio messages, launching his few aircraft on pointless missions, doing everything possible to draw American attention. It finally works. Halsey receives reports of Japanese carriers north of his position. This is exactly what he's been waiting for. Carriers are the premier striking arm of naval warfare. If there are Japanese carriers out there, they must be destroyed before they can attack the invasion fleet. Halsey makes his decision. He takes every available ship, his fast carriers, his battleships, his cruisers, his destroyers and steams north at full speed to intercept Ozawa's carriers. Task Force 34, the surface action group specifically formed to guard San Bernardino Strait, goes with him. San Bernardino Strait is left completely unguarded. Admiral King, commanding the 7th Fleet, doesn't know this. He assumes Task Force 34 is still guarding the strait. Halsey's message traffic was ambiguous, and in the confusion of battle, the miscommunication goes unnoticed. Nobody tells Taffy 3 that the northern approach is wide open. After dark on October 24th, Admiral Kurita's center force turns around again. The retreat was just a temporary withdrawal to regroup and to wait for darkness. At 20:35 hours, Kurita's ships enter San Bernardino Strait. There are no American ships to stop them. No one even sees them. They pass through in darkness and turn south, heading directly toward Samar Island, toward Taffy 3.2 the south. Admiral Nishimura's southern force enters Surigao Strait and runs straight into Admiral Oldendorf's battle line. 6 American battleships open fire at point-blank range. It's a massacre. The battleships Yamashiro and Fuso are blown apart. The heavy cruiser Megami is gutted. Only one Japanese destroyer escapes. Nishimura goes down with his flagship. Admiral Shima, seeing the destruction, wisely retreats. The southern approach is sealed, but the northern approach is wide open. And at dawn on October 25th, Admiral Kurita's center force rounds the northern tip of Samar Island and spots the escort carriers of Taffy 3 having breakfast. At 0637 hours, an Avenger on anti-submarine patrol from the St. Lo reports a contact. The pilot sounds confused. "I see ships. Lots of ships. Big ships. They're not ours." The radio operator asks him to clarify. "What kind of ships?" The pilot's voice comes back, now urgent. "I count for battleships, 8 cruisers, and numerous destroyers. They're 20 miles northwest of your position. They're heading this way, fast." On the bridge of the Fanshawe Bay, there's a moment of stunned silence. Someone says it must be a mistake. Someone else says it must be friendlies that the pilot Admiral Sprague orders a check with Fleet Command. "Are there any friendly battleships in the area?" The answer comes back, negative. All American battleships are either in Surigao Strait or with Halsey far to the north. At 0646, the lookouts on the Fanshawe Bay's bridge spot shapes on the horizon. Distinctive pagoda-style masts. Japanese warships, lots of them. Admiral Sprague lifts his binoculars. For a moment, he just stares. Then he starts counting. 1 battleship, 2, 3, 4. The lead battleship is enormous, far larger than anything the Americans have. That has to be the Yamato. Behind the battleships, he can see cruisers. Their distinctive silhouettes are unmistakable. Heavy cruisers, at least 6 of them, and they're all heading directly toward Taffy 3. At 0648 hours. The Japanese open fire. The first salvo falls about 5,000 yards astern of the Fanshawe Bay. The shells create massive geysers, bright-colored splashes 200 feet high. The Japanese use dye in their shells to help spot fall. Red, green, yellow, blue. Each ship uses a different color so they can track which shells are theirs. It would be beautiful if it weren't so terrifying. On the bridge, someone gasps. Admiral Sprague says something then he says what everyone is thinking. That son of a bitch, he's got us. The most powerful battleship fleet in the world is 20 miles away and closing at 30 knots. His escort carriers can make 17 knots at flank speed, barely faster than a surfaced submarine. The Japanese will overtake them in less than an hour. Sprague has minutes to make a decision that will determine whether thousands of men live or die. Commander Ernest Evans and the Johnston. Before we continue with the battle, you need to understand the man who will turn this impossible situation into a fighting chance. Commander Ernest Evans was born in 1908 in Pawnee, Oklahoma. He was Cherokee, part of the Native American community that had been forcefully relocated to Oklahoma decades earlier. Growing up in Pawnee, Evans experienced both poverty and discrimination, but he also grew up with stories of Cherokee warriors, tales of courage and defiance against overwhelming odds. Evans was smart. He won an appointment to the U.S. Naval Academy, graduating in 1931. This was rare. Native Americans were not commonly accepted to the academy, but Evans proved himself. He was physically tough, mentally sharp, and absolutely fearless. By 1943, he'd worked his way up to commander and was given command of a brand new Fletcher-class destroyer, the USS Johnston, hull number DD-557. When Evans took command of the Johnston on October 27, 1943, he gathered the crew on the fantail for a speech. What he said would become legendary in the Navy. This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to go along had better get off right now. Now that I have a fighting ship, I intend to fight. I will never back down from a fight, and I expect the same from every man aboard this ship. We will fight to the last shell, the last torpedo, and if necessary, we will ram the enemy. Nobody got off. For the next year, Evans trained his crew relentlessly. He drilled them on damage control, on gunnery, on torpedo attacks, on every possible scenario. He was demanding, harsh even, but fair. His crew respected him, feared him a little, and would follow him anywhere. The Johnston saw action in the Marshall Islands, at Hollandia. Evans earned a reputation for aggression, always the first to attack, always pressing the enemy, always looking for a fight. The Johnston earned a reputation as one of the best trained, most aggressive destroyers in the Pacific Fleet. Now, on the morning of October 25, 1944, Commander Evans stands on the bridge of the Johnston, watching through his binoculars as for Japanese battleships steam toward his fleet. Every instinct, every bit of training, every tactical manual says the same thing: run. Destroyers do not engage battleships. It's suicide. But Ernest Evans didn't become a naval officer to run from fights. At 0650 hours, without waiting for orders from Admiral Sprague, Evans makes his decision. He turns to his helmsman and says, "Left full rudder. All ahead, flank. General quarters. Load all guns. Prepare torpedoes for firing." The Johnston heels over as she turns hard to port. Her 4 boilers pour black smoke from her stacks as she accelerates to 36 knots. Her battle flagger, massive American flag, far larger than regulation, is raised to the masthead. She's turning toward the enemy. The crew thinks their captain has lost his mind. The bridge officers are speechless. The gunnery officer asks, "Captain, are we attacking?" Evans doesn't take his eyes off the enemy fleet. "Yes." Sound general quarters. "All hands to battle stations. Stand by to commence firing." On the ship's intercom, Evans addresses the crew. His voice is calm, matter-of-fact. "This is the captain speaking. A large Japanese fleet has been contacted. They are 15 miles away and headed in our direction. They are believed to have 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, and a number of destroyers. This will be a fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected. We will do what damage we can." There's a moment of silence throughout the ship. Then the crew moves to their battle stations with a strange calm. They know what's coming. They know they're probably going to die, but if they're going to die, They're going to die fighting the USS Johnston, all 2,100 tons of her, charges alone toward for battleships that collectively displace more than 200 tons. It's not a fair fight, but Ernest Evans doesn't care about fair. The Johnston's attack. Evans brings the Johnston in at 36 knots, zigzagging through shell splashes. The Japanese have spotted his charge and are firing everything they have at him. 14-inch shells from the battleships, 8-inch shells from the cruisers, 5-inch shells from the destroyers. The shells create geysers all around the Johnston. Some splashes are so close they drench the bridge crew. One near miss lifts the entire ship out of the water, throwing men off their feet. But Evans holds his course. He's heading for the heavy cruisers leading the Japanese formation, the Kumano, Suzuya, Chikuma, and Tone. These ships are deadly, each armed with 10 8-inch guns and 16 long lance torpedoes. If they get within range of the American carriers, they'll slaughter them. Evans has to stop them, or at least slow them down. At 0710 hours, the Johnston's 5 5-inch guns open fire. They're firing at maximum elevation, maximum range. The shells arc high into the sky and come crashing down on the Japanese cruisers. The 5-inch shells can't penetrate the cruiser's armor. Everyone knows this, but Evans isn't trying to sink them. He's trying to blind them, shooting at their bridges, their fire control directors, their radar antennas. Every hit that damages their ability to aim is a small victory. And incredibly, the Johnston scores hits. Her gunnery officer, Lieutenant Robert C. Hagen, is one of the best in the fleet. His gun crews have trained for this. They're firing 5 rounds per minute per gun, 25 shells every minute. The Johnston's magazines are stocked with high explosive shells and star shells, illumination rounds for night combat. They're not ideal for surface combat, but Evans uses what he has. The Johnston closes to 10,000 yards. This is suicide range, close enough that the Japanese can hardly miss, but it's also optimal torpedo range. Evans orders all 10 torpedoes launched. His torpedo officer, Lieutenant Joseph A. Fanning, has been waiting for this moment. The 10 21-inch torpedoes leap from their tubes, 5 from each side, and race toward the Japanese cruisers at 46 knots. The torpedoes leave white wakes in the calm water. The Japanese cruiser captains see them coming. Ships turn hard, trying to avoid them. The formation scatters as each ship maneuvers independently, but one torpedo finds its target. It slams into the bow of the heavy cruiser Kumano, exploding with a massive blast. The explosion tears off the Kumano's entire bow forward of the first turret. She lists heavily, slows to a crawl, and falls out of formation. She's forced to retreat to Japan for repairs. She'll never fight again. First blood to the USS Johnston. The Johnston's crew erupts in cheers. They actually hit one. Against all odds, their tiny ship has damaged a heavy cruiser twice their size. But their celebration is short, because now every Japanese ship in range turns its guns on the Johnston. The Johnston is 8. Johnston has just fired her torpedoes and is turning away when the world explodes around her. 3 14-inch shells from the battleship Congo slam into the destroyer in quick succession. Each shell weighs 1,400 pounds and is traveling at 2,500 feet per second. The first shell hits the bridge. It crashes through the thin hull plating like it's paper, passes through the bridge, and explodes just after exiting the far side. The blast wave rips through the bridge structure. Commander Evans is standing near the rear of the bridge when the shell hits. He's thrown across the compartment by the concussion. Shrapnel tears into his left hand, severing 2 fingers. Other fragments pepper his body. Of the dozen men on the bridge, half are killed instantly. The navigation equipment is destroyed. The ship's primary fire control director is wrecked. The communications gear is gone. The second shell hits lower, penetrating the forward engine room. It explodes inside the compartment, killing everyone inside instantly. 33 men. The explosion tears apart the machinery. The Johnston's afterboiler is destroyed. Her speed drops immediately from 36 knots to 27 knots, then to 20 knots, then to 17 knots. The third shell destroys the aft gun mount 55. The explosion kills the entire gun. Crew 12 men. The gun itself is blown off its mount and lies twisted on the deck. In less than 30 seconds. The Johnston has lost 50 men killed and dozens wounded. She's lost half her firepower. She's lost most of her speed. She's on fire in multiple locations. Oil from ruptured fuel tanks is leaking into the sea. leaving a dark slick behind her. By every reasonable standard, the USS Johnston is finished. Commander Evans, bleeding heavily from his mangled hand and multiple shrapnel wounds, refuses to accept this. He wraps his ruined hand in a handkerchief and continues commanding from the wrecked bridge. When someone suggests they abandon ship, Evans snarls, "Like hell we will. We still have 3 guns and we can still steer. We're still in this fight." The problem is that with the fire control director destroyed, there's no way to aim the remaining guns from the bridge. The solution comes from Lieutenant Hagen, the gunnery officer. Each gun mount has local optical sights for backup. The gun captains can aim and fire manually, independent of the bridge. It's primitive, it's slow, but it works. Evans orders all 3 remaining guns to continue firing independently. Each gun captain becomes his own fire control officer, choosing targets and firing at will. Meanwhile, in the bowels of the ship, Lieutenant Commander J.J. Bechtel, the chief engineer, is performing a miracle. The forward engine room is wrecked, but the after engine room is still intact. Bechtel and his damage control teams work frantically in temperatures exceeding 130 degrees, bypassing damaged systems, rerouting steam lines, and coaxing every bit of power they can from the remaining boiler. After 10 minutes of desperate work, they get the Johnston moving again. First 10 knots, then 15, then, incredibly, 17 knots, barely half her normal speed, but enough to maneuver. The Johnston is still in the fight, but she's not alone anymore. The Samuel B. Roberts, the destroyer escort that fought like a BH for destroyer escorts of Taffy 3, were never supposed to fight battleships. They were submarine hunters, convoy escorts, the smallest, most lightly armed ships in the American fleet. The USS Samuel B. Roberts, under Lieutenant Commander Robert W. Copeland, was typical of her class. At 1,400 tons, she was less than 2/3 the size of a destroyer. She carried just 2 5-inch guns instead of 5. She had only 3 torpedo tubes instead of 10. Her maximum speed was 24 knots, far slower than the destroyers, and barely faster than the enemy cruisers. But Lieutenant Commander Copeland was cut from the same cloth as Ernest Evans. When Admiral Sprague ordered the destroyer escorts to attack, Copeland didn't hesitate. The Samuel B. Roberts, along with her sisters Dennis, John C. Butler, and Raymond, formed up and charged toward the Japanese heavy cruisers. Copeland addressed his crew over the intercom. "Men, we're going in. This will be a fight against overwhelming odds. We're the smallest ship out here, but we're going to hit them as hard as we can. Give them hell." The crew of the Sammy B, that's what they called her, responded with a cheer. They knew they were probably going to die. They charged anyway. But Samuel B. Roberts closed to 4,000 yards from the heavy cruiser Chikai. That's 2 miles, close enough to see individual sailors on the enemy ship's deck. Close enough that the cruiser's 8-inch guns couldn't depress low enough to hit her. The Chikai had to use her smaller secondary guns, but the Sammy B could fire, and fire she did. Her 2 5-inch guns began firing as fast as the crews could load them. The gun captain of Mount 51, gunner's mate 3rd class, Paul Henry Carr, drove his crew relentlessly. They fired 608 rounds in 35 minutes. That's more than 17 rounds per minute per gun, far beyond the gun's designed rate of fire. The barrels began to glow red from the heat. Paint blistered off. The deck beneath the guns buckled. Casings ejected so fast they piled up ankle deep around the gun mount, and incredibly, the Sammy B was scoring hits. Her 5-inch shells couldn't penetrate the Chokai's armor belt, but they were hitting the superstructure, starting fires, destroying radar antennas, killing exposed personnel. At 4,100 yards, the Samuel B. Roberts launched her 3 torpedoes. All 3 ran hot and straight toward the Chokai. One hit. The torpedo slammed into the Chokai's engineering spaces. The explosion was massive, tearing a hole in the cruiser's side and flooding multiple compartments. The Chokai slowed, listed, and began to burn fiercely. She would eventually sink, making the tiny Samuel B. Roberts the only destroyer escort in history to sink a heavy cruiser in surface combat. But the Sammy B had drawn too much attention. 3 heavy cruisers, Chokai and Haguro, concentrated their fire on the little destroyer escort. 8-inch shells began slamming into the Samuel B. Roberts. The first hit destroyed the aftergun mount, killing most of the crew. The second hit penetrated the engine room, destroying the machinery. The third hit tore open the hull at the WATERLINE. Water poured in. The Sammy B slowed and stopped, dead in the water, but Mount 51, the forward gun, was still firing. Gunner's mate Carr refused to stop. Even as the ship was sinking beneath him, even as fires raged around him, even as water lapped at the gun mount, he kept loading and firing. Then a shell exploded near the mount. Shrapnel tore through Carr's abdomen, nearly disemboweling him. He collapsed, dying. But even as his life drained away, Carr tried to load one more shell. His crew tried to pull him away from the gun, tried to get him to safety. He fought them, screaming, "Leave me alone. I have to get this last round off." Paul Carr died at his gun, trying to load one more shell. He was 24 years old. He was posthumously awarded the Silver Star. The carriers under fire, running an FIGHTING, while the screening ships are buying time with their blood. The 6 escort carriers are running for their lives. Admiral Sprague orders his carriers to head southeast, directly away from the Japanese, while launching every aircraft they have. He also orders them to make oily smoke that pours from their stacks and hides them from the enemy. The escort carriers aren't fast. 17 knots is their maximum speed, but they have one advantage: they're small and maneuverable. The carriers zigzag constantly, changing course every few minutes to throw off the Japanese gunners. The Japanese are firing at extreme range, over 20,000 yards. At that distance, even a small course change can cause a salvo to miss by hundreds of yards. The carriers use this to their advantage, waiting until they see the muzzle flashes from the Japanese guns, then turning hard just before the shells arrive. It's a desperate game of chance. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The Colleen Bay is hit multiple times by 8-inch shells from the heavy cruisers. One shell penetrates her thin hull and passes completely through without exploding. The fuse doesn't arm because there isn't enough resistance. The shell leaves 2 gaping holes, one on each side of the ship. But the Colleen Bay stays afloat. The Fanshawe Bay, Admiral Sprague's flagship, is straddled by salvo after salvo. Colored geysers erupt around her: red, green, yellow, blue. Each color represents a different Japanese ship firing. At one point, Sprague counts splashes from 6 different ships falling around his carrier. Simultaneously, the White Plains is hit by a dud shell that crashes through the flight deck and lodges in the hangar deck without exploding. If it had detonated, it would have gutted the ship. The crew carefully disarms it later, but the Gambier Bay isn't so lucky. She's the slowest of the carriers, and she falls behind the formation. At 0810 hours, she's isolated, and the heavy cruiser Chikuma closes in for the kill. The Chikuma fires salvo after salvo into the helpless carrier. 8-inch shells punch through the Gambier Bay's thin armor like tissue paper. One shell destroys the forward engine room. Another hits the aft engine room. The Gambier Bay slows to 11 knots, then 5 knots, then stops completely. 3 more heavy cruisers join the Chikumatone, Hagudo, and Chikai. They surround the Gambier Bay and pour fire into her from all sides. It's an execution. The crew fights to save their ship, but it's hopeless. Fires rage out of control. The list increases. At 0850 hours, the captain gives the order to abandon ship. At 0907 hours, the Gambier Bay rolls over and sinks. She takes 147 men with her. She's the only American carrier sunk by surface gunfire in the entire war. But even as the Gambier Bay is dying, the aircraft from all 6 carriers are wreaking havoc on the Japanese fleet. The aircraft attack. Courage in the SKY, the aircraft launching from Taffy. 3's carriers aren't equipped for surface combat. They're loaded with depth charges for submarines, anti-personnel bombs for ground support, and some have no ordnance at all. They were armed for routine patrol when the battle started, but they attack anyway. FM2. Wildcat fighters make strafing runs with their .50 caliber machine guns. The bullets can't penetrate battleship armor, but they can kill exposed personnel, damage radar antennas, and force the Japanese gun crews to take cover. TBM Avenger torpedo bombers drop depth charges on the battleships. Depth charges are designed to explode underwater, triggered by water pressure. When dropped on ships, they explode on impact with the water surface, doing minimal damage, but they force the battleships to maneuver, disrupting their gunnery. When the aircraft run out of ammunition, they make dry runs flying directly at the Japanese ships as if attacking, forcing them to take evasive action, even though no weapons are being released. Lieutenant Paul Bear Garrison makes 37 separate strafing and dry runs on Japanese ships over the course of 2 hours. He fires every round of ammunition he has. then continues making fake attacks until his fuel is nearly exhausted. Only then does he return to his carrier. Ensign Hans Jensen, flying an Avenger with no torpedoes and no bombs, makes 6 dry runs on the battleship Haruna. Each time, the Haruna turns to avoid what it thinks is a torpedo attack. Losing speed and falling out of formation, the Japanese are forced to assign aircraft to combat air patrol. Fighters that should be protecting them from these attacks can't do so because Japan has no carriers nearby. The few Japanese fighters that try to intercept the American aircraft are overwhelmed by the sheer number of attackers. But the most effective attacks come from the aircraft that actually have armor, bombs, ordnance begged, borrowed, or stolen from other units. Lieutenant Commander William Gallagher leads a strike group from the Kitkan Bay, armed with 500-pound general-purpose bombs. They attack the heavy cruiser Suzuya, scoring multiple hits. The bombs penetrate the cruiser's thin deck armor and explode inside the ship. Fires break out in the Suzuya's torpedo storage area. At 1,000 hours, the torpedoes cook off in a massive explosion. The Suzuya is blown in half and sinks. Aircraft from the Kalinin Bay attack the heavy cruiser Chikuma, starting fires and damaging her engineering plant. The Chikuma slows and eventually falls out of formation, burning fiercely. She will sink later in the day. The aircraft also provide something equally valuable: reconnaissance. They report the positions and movements of Japanese ships to Admiral Sprague, allowing him to maneuver his carriers more effectively, and they provide psychological pressure. The constant attacks, even ineffective ones, wear on the Japanese. The ships are constantly maneuvering, constantly under attack. Gun crews are exhausted. Officers are confused. The neat battle formation has dissolved into chaos. The Johnston's second attack, protecting the Kara Resring, member the Johnston, crippled at 07:05, down to 17 knots, with only 3 guns still firing. She's about to do something even more insane than her first attack. At 07:30 hours, Commander Evans sees a squadron of Japanese destroyers making a torpedo run on the carriers. 7 destroyers, each armed with 8 to 10 torpedoes, are moving into position to launch a massive spread of long lance torpedoes at the American carriers. If those torpedoes launch, they'll slaughter the carriers. The long lances are the most effective torpedoes in the world: fast, long-ranged, powerful. The thin-skinned escort carriers won't survive even one hit. Evans makes a decision that defies all reason. The Johnston, crippled and barely moving, positions herself between the Japanese destroyers and the American carriers. 1 destroyer against 7. Evans orders his 3 remaining guns to open fire on the destroyer squadron. The Johnston's shells fall among the Japanese destroyers, forcing them to maneuver, disrupting their torpedo attack. The Japanese destroyer squadron commander is astonished. A crippled American destroyer is attacking his entire squadron. It makes no sense. Surely it's a feint. Surely heavy cruisers or battleships must be nearby. The Japanese destroyers turn away from the carriers to deal with this threat. They close on the Johnston, guns firing, but in turning away from the carriers, they've ruined their torpedo attack. The angle is wrong. The range is too great. The moment has passed. The Johnston has saved the carriers again, but the price is terrible. The Japanese destroyers concentrate their fire on the Johnston. 5-inch shells slam into the destroyer from multiple directions. 1 shell destroys the forward gun mount, killing the entire crew. Another shell hits the midship structure, starting a massive fire. A 3rd shell penetrates the after steering compartment, forcing the Johnston to steer manually by physically moving the rudder with chains. By 08:00 hours, the Johnston has lost steering control. Half her remaining guns, and dozens more men. She's listing 10 degrees to port. Fires are burning out of control. Her speed has dropped to barely 10 knots, but incredibly, inexplicably, she's still fighting. Her 1 remaining gun mount continues to fire. The gun captain choosing targets independently. Damage control parties fight the fires. Engineering crews keep the 1 working boiler running. The Johnston refuses to die. The Hoel's SACRI while the Johnston is fighting the destroyer squadron. The USS Hoel is dying. The Hoel has been hit 40 times by shells ranging from 5-inch to 14. She's been hit by the battleships Congo and Haruna. She's been hit by multiple heavy cruisers. She's been hit by destroyers. Her bridge is destroyed. Commander Kintberger is commanding from the chart house, his face bleeding from shrapnel wounds. The forward boiler is destroyed. The after boiler is barely functioning. One gun mount is wrecked, another is out of ammunition. The hole is listing 20 degrees. Water is pouring in through dozens of holes. The pumps can't keep up. At 0830 hours, a 16-inch shell from the battleship Congo slams into the hole's engineering spaces. The explosion is catastrophic. It destroys the remaining boiler and tears open the hull. The hole immediately begins to capsize. Commander Kintberger gives the order to abandon ship. The crew goes over the side, jumping into the oil-covered water. The hull rolls onto her side, her propellers still turning uselessly in the air. For a moment she hangs there, as if reluctant to go. Then she slides beneath the waves, taking 253 men with her. Only 86 of the hull's crew survive. The Heerman's lonely. FIGHT of the 3 destroyers, only the USS Heerman is still at full capability. She hasn't been hit. But Commander Hathaway is determined to press the attack. At 0835 hours, Hathaway sees the Japanese battleship Haruna turning to fire a broadside at the escort carriers. The Haruna is in perfect position to devastate the carriers with her 14-inch guns. Hathaway does something suicidal. He steers the Heerman directly between the Haruna and the carriers, deliberately placing his ship in the line of fire. The Haruna's broadside roars out 8 14-inch shells, each weighing 1,400 pounds, but instead of hitting the carriers, they hit the water around the Heerman. Massive geysers erupt around the destroyer. One near miss is so close, it lifts the Heerman bodily out of the water. But the Heerman survives, and more importantly, the carriers aren't hit. Hathaway then does something even more audacious. He charges the Haruna, firing his 5-inch guns as fast as they can load. He closes to 5,000 yards point-blank range for a battleship. The Haruna turns away. A 32,000-ton battleship, armed with 14-inch guns, turns away from a 2,100-ton destroyer, armed with 5-inch guns. It's insane. It defies all logic. But it happens. The Heerman breaks off the attack and races to join the destroyer escorts, which are making their own desperate attacks. The final minutes of the Samuel B. Roberts. The Samuel B. Roberts is dying, but she's not done yet. After the hit that killed gunner's mate Carr, the Sammy B is dead in the water, listing heavily, burning fiercely, but her forward gun mount is still firing. Lieutenant Commander Copeland refuses to give up the gun crew of Mount 51. What's left of them continues to load and fire manually. They have no power, no fire control. They're aiming by eye and firing by hand, but they're still fighting. At 0900 hours, an 8-inch shell from the cruiser Chikuma hits the Samuel B. Roberts amid. The shell penetrates the thin hull, passes through the ship, and explodes as it exits the far side. The explosion tears the ship nearly in half. The Samuel B. Roberts begins to break apart. The bow and stern start to separate, connected only by the keel and a few structural members. Lieutenant Commander Copeland orders abandon ship. The crew goes over the side, many of them wounded, all of them exhausted. At 0910 hours, the USS Samuel B. Roberts breaks in two and sinks. She takes 89 men with her. Of her crew of 224, only 120 survive. The destroyer escort that fought like a battleship is gone. The miracle. Kurita. Rita sits now 0920 hours. The battle has been raging for 2.5 hours. Let's take stock of the situation. The Americans have lost. The escort carrier Gambier Bay sunk the destroyers Johnston and Hoel, both sinking. The destroyer escorts Samuel B. Roberts sunk, hundreds of men dead or in the water, multiple other ships damaged. The Japanese have lost. The heavy cruiser sinking the heavy cruiser Kumano, heavily damaged, and retreating the heavy cruiser damaged and burning the heavy cruiser sinking multiple ships with minor to moderate damage, their formation completely disrupted. But the Japanese still have 4 battleships, multiple cruisers, and destroyers. They vastly outnumber and outgun what's left of Taffy 3. The remaining 5 American carriers are still within range. Victory is within their grasp. Admiral Kurita stands on the bridge of the Yamato, surveying the battle. He sees smoke everywhere, American aircraft constantly attacking, his ships scattered across miles of ocean, reports coming in of torpedo wakes, of damaged ships, of confusion. And then Kurita makes a decision that will haunt him for the rest of his life. At 09:05 hours, he orders his fleet to break off the attack and withdraw. The most powerful battleship fleet ever assembled, with victory minutes away, turns around and retreats. Why? Even today, 80 years later, historians debate this question. Kurita himself offered several explanations over the years, sometimes contradicting himself. The most likely answer is that Kurita believed he was fighting fleet carriers and heavy cruisers, not escort carriers and destroyers. In the smoke and confusion, with his ship scattered and under constant attack from multiple directions, he lost situational awareness. His staff reported sinking multiple carriers they didn't know they were escort carriers, not fleet carriers. They reported heavy cruisers attacking they didn't know they were destroyers. Kurita feared that American fast battleships might be nearby. He didn't know Halsey had taken all of them north. He feared being trapped between multiple American forces. His ships had been under continuous attack for over 2 hours. His carefully planned formation had dissolved into chaos. He'd lost track of where all his ships were. Some were damaged and retreating. Others were out of formation. He was exhausted. His staff was exhausted. They'd been at battle stations since the previous afternoon, when they'd been attacked in the Philippine Sea, and perhaps, just perhaps, he was unnerved by the sheer ferocity of the American attack, the suicidal charges by destroyers, the constant air attacks, the torpedoes in the water, the smoke, the confusion. Whatever the reason, Kurita orders the withdrawal. His ships turn and head back toward San Bernardino Strait. The invasion fleet is saved. Taffy 3 has won. The Johnston's final MOMNTS, but the USS Johnston doesn't know the battle is over. At 09 for 5 hours. The Johnston is still trying to fight. She's listing 35 degrees to port. Fires are burning out of control throughout the ship. Her one remaining gun is out of ammunition. She's dead in the water. Commander Evans knows it's over. He gives the order to abandon ship. The crew begins going over the side, jumping into the oil-covered water. Many are wounded. All are exhausted as the crew is abandoning ship. A Japanese destroyer closes to 2,000 yards and opens fire with her 5-inch guns and machine guns. The shells and bullets tear into the Johnston and into the men in the water, killing dozens. It's a war crime. The men are helpless, abandoning a sinking ship. But war is not clean or fair or just. Commander Evans is last seen on the bridge of the Johnston, standing at attention, going down with his ship. His body is never recovered. Of the Johnston's crew of 327, only 141 survive. At 10:10 hours, the USS Johnston rolls over and sinks sternfirst into 6,000 feet of water. She fought for 3.5 hours. She launched all her torpedoes and fired all her ammunition. She damaged multiple Japanese ships. She charged battleships twice. She saved the carriers 3 times, and she never surrendered. Commander Ernest Evans is posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. The citation reads, in part, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty. Commander Evans inspired his men to a degree seldom seen in Navy annals. His aggressive fighting spirit and heroic devotion to duty were in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. The men in the WWII after the battle. Hundreds of American sailors are floating in the ocean. They're wearing life jackets, clinging to debris, struggling to stay afloat in the oil-covered water. The oil is thick and black. It coats everything. Men swallow it and vomit. It burns their eyes. It makes it impossible to see friends, and impossible to be seen by rescue ships. The water is warm at 5 degrees, but exhaustion, wounds, and exposure take their toll. Men slip out of their life jackets and drown. Men lose their grip on debris and sink beneath the waves. Sharks circle. The Battle of Samar was fought in waters known for large shark populations. Over the next 2 days, many men will be attacked and killed by sharks. The men from the Gambia Bay, Johnston, Hoel, and Samuel B. Roberts drift in groups, trying to stay together, trying to keep each other awake and alive. A Japanese destroyer passes close to a group of survivors. The Americans think they're about to be Instead, the Japanese captain appears on the bridge, comes to attention, and salutes. Then the destroyer steams away. It will be 2 days before most of the survivors are rescued. Many don't make it. They die of wounds, exposure, drowning, or shark attacks. Of the approximately 1,500 men who went into the water, roughly 1,100 are eventually rescued. The historical VRD Battle of Samar is now recognized as one of the greatest last stands in naval history, comparable to Thermopylae, to Rorke's Drift, to the Alamo. Samuel Eliot Morison, the U.S. Navy's official historian, writes, In no engagement of its entire history has the United States Navy shown more gallantry, guts, and gumption than in those 2 morning hours between 0730 and 0930 off Samar. The engagement is studied at naval academies around the world, not as a model of perfect tactics, the tactics were desperate improvisation, but as a model of courage, determination, and the will to fight against impossible odds. The battle proves several things that military theorists thought impossible. First, that destroyers can effectively engage battleships, not by sinking them. The Johnston didn't sink any battleships, but by disrupting them, confusing them, forcing them to maneuver and lose time. Second, that a numerically inferior force can defeat a superior force through aggressive action. The Japanese had every advantage except one: they hesitated. The Americans, despite having every reason to run, attacked without hesitation. Third, that morale and determination can overcome material disadvantage. The Japanese ships were bigger, faster, more heavily armed, and more heavily armored, but the American crews fought harder, took more risks, and refused to give up. Recognition: an RAMBR Commander Ernest Evans receives the Medal of Honor posthumously. He's the first Native American in the U.S. Navy to receive this honor. The USS Johnston receives the Presidential Unit Citation, the highest award a ship can receive. She's credited with damaging multiple Japanese ships and saving the carriers from destruction. Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland of the Samuel B. Roberts receives the Navy Cross. His ship receives the Navy Unit Commendation. Gunner's Mate 3rd Class Paul Carr receives the Silver Star posthumously for his actions at his gun station. Dozens of other sailors receive medals for Valor. Navy Crosses, Silver Stars, Bronze Stars. But perhaps the highest honor comes from the Japanese. Admiral Kurita, in his post-war writings, refers to the American ships as the destroyers that fought with the spirit of battleships. Years later, when asked about the battle, Kurita admits, "I mistook your escort carriers for fleet carriers, your destroyers for cruisers. The ferocity of the attack convinced me I was facing a much stronger force than I had anticipated. The wrecks are diastore of your diocese or 75 years. The wrecks of the ships lost at Samar lie, undiscovered on the ocean floor. The water is too deep, over 20,000 feet in places, and the location too remote for traditional search methods." But in 2019, a team led by billionaire explorer Victor Vestivo locates the wreck of the USS Johnston using advanced sonar and submersibles. She's found at a depth of 21,180 feet, one of the deepest shipwrecks ever discovered. The wreck is remarkably intact. The hull number 557 is still visible. The gun mounts, though damaged, are still in place. The ship rests on the bottom in about 120 feet of water. Listing to port, Vestivo's team films the wreck but does not disturb it. Under U.S. law, the Johnston is a war grave. She's the final resting place of Commander Evans and the 186 men who died with her. She must be treated with respect. In 2022, the Samuel B. Roberts is discovered at a depth of 22,916 feet, the deepest shipwreck ever found. She's broken in two, just as eyewitnesses described, but both sections are identifiable. The USS Hoel remains undiscovered as of 2024. These ships are more than just wrecks. They're memorials, they're reminders, they're proof that ordinary people, in extraordinary circumstances, are capable of extraordinary things.